The great chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with worried voices. 12 different alien species sat around the massive circular table, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes. Some had multiple eyes, others had tentacles, instead of arms, and a few glowed softly in the dim light. But today, fear united them all. Ambassador Zixtera stood at the center of the room, her crystal-like body shaking. She was a Villani, one of the most peaceful races in the galaxy. People were tall and thin, with skin that looked like living diamond. They had spent thousands of years perfecting art, science, and philosophy. Violence was something they had left behind long ago. Honored council members, Zixtara began, her voice carrying the musical tone that all Villani possessed, are dying. Every day, more of our worlds fall to the Krog Imperium. We need help, or we will all be dead within a year. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew about the Krog. They were blue-skinned warriors with 4 powerful arms and a love for battle. For the past 3 months, they had been moving through Villani space like a plague. They destroyed everything in their path and took prisoners only to use them as slaves. Council Speaker Morden leaned forward in his chair. He was a Nexari, with 8 eyes arranged around his large head. His people were known for their wisdom and calm thinking. Ambassador, we understand your pain, but the Krog have technology and weapons that none of us can match. Our combined fleets would not be enough to stop them. You don't understand, Zixtera said, her voice breaking. The Krog are not the real threat. They serve something worse, something ancient and terrible. She pressed a button on her device, and a hologram appeared in the center of the room. It showed a massive black structure floating in space, surrounded by smaller ships that looked like metal insects. The structure seemed to absorb light, making it hard to look at directly. This is what the Krog call their masters, Shadow Collective. They are not alive like us. They are machines, but not simple ones. They think, they plan, and they hunger. For one thing above all else, what do they want? Asked Counselor Vexinar, an elderly member whose species looked like walking trees with glowing bark. Life itself, Zixtera replied. They harvest entire populations, not just to kill them, but to process them. They turn living beings into fuel for their machines. They study our biology, our genetics, everything that makes us who we are. Then they use that knowledge to make themselves stronger. The hologram changed, showing images that made several council members look away. Entire cities had been stripped. Of life, forests were gray and dead. Oceans had turned black. The Shadow Collective didn't just conquer worlds, they consumed them completely. How many worlds have they taken? Orden asked quietly. 17 so far, Zixtera said. All Villani colonies. But they're not stopping with us. We're scientists. Have detected their scout ships and systems belonging to other species. They're mapping the entire galaxy, preparing for something much bigger. A representative from the hegemony, a species that looked like giant crabs with too many legs, clicked his claws nervously. Our military analysts say the Shadow Collective has weapons we've never seen before. Energy shields that can stop anything we throw at them. Ships that can appear and disappear at will. Ground forces that seem to be part machine, part organic. And the Krog serve them willingly. Asked another council member. Not willingly, Zixtera said. The first Krog worlds were conquered just like ours. But instead of harvesting them, the Shadow Collective did something different. They changed the Krog, made them stronger, faster, more aggressive. Now the Krog thinks serving the machines is the greatest honor possible. Compete to see who can bring the most prisoners to their masters. The room filled with worried murmurs. Every species present had their own military, but none were designed for the kind of war the Shadow Collective was bringing. Most galactic civilizations had moved beyond large-scale violence centuries ago. They had police forces and small defense fleets, but nothing that could stand against an enemy that saw war as a way of life. What about the Terran Defense Alliance? Suggested a representative whose species resembled large, intelligent birds. They have the strongest military in this sector. Morden shook his A-tied head. The Alliance has already sent scouts to observe Krog movements. 3 of their best ships never returned. The Alliance commander sent a message saying they cannot risk their entire fleet on what appears to be a suicide mission. Zixthera felt hope draining from her crystalline form. She had traveled across the galaxy, begging every major power for help. All had given her the same answer. The Shadow Collective was too strong, too advanced, too dangerous to fight. There must be someone, she whispered. Some species we haven't contacted. Some military force we don't know about. Old Counselor Vexenar stirred in his seat. Skin was scarred from age, and his glowing patches had dimmed over the centuries. He was one of the oldest beings in the galaxy, old enough to remember stories that others had forgotten. There's one possibility, he said slowly. Be madness to even consider it. Every eye in the room turned to him. Zixthera stepped closer, desperation clear in her voice. Please, Counselor. Anything, my people are dying while we debate. Vexenar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with old memories. In the archives of my people, there are records from the time of the precursors. It's the ancient race that came before all of us. They left behind many warnings, many sealed areas of space that they marked as too dangerous to enter. The quarantine zones, Morden said. But those are just areas with dangerous radiation or unstable stars.
Most of them, yes.
Vexenar agreed. But there is one zone that is different. Quarantine Zone, Omega, in the outer rim of the galaxy. The precursors didn't seal it because of natural dangers. He sealed it because of what lives there. He pressed buttons on his own device, and a star map appeared. At the very edge of the galaxy, a small section of space was marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The precursors called it the Dark Zone. They found a species there, living on a world so hostile that it should not be able to support complex life. A world where everything is poisonous, where the weather can kill, where the very ground shifts and burns. The creatures that evolved there became something the precursors had never seen before. What kind of creatures? Asked Zixthera. Apex. Predators, Vexenar said. Not just hunters, but killers, so perfect that they dominated every other form of life on their world. The precursors watched them for a time and saw something that terrified them. These creatures didn't just survive on their hostile world, thrived on it. They turned every danger into a weapon, every challenge into an advantage. What happened to them? The precursors decided they were too dangerous to contact. They placed a barrier around the entire system and marked it as forbidden. For over 2,000 years, no one has gone there. We don't even know if the species still exists. Morden leaned back in his chair. Even if they do exist, why would we want to contact them? If the precursors thought they were too dangerous, what makes you think they would help us instead of conquering us? Zixthera looked around the room at the faces of the council members. She saw fear, doubt, and resignation. Her people were going to die, and no one was willing to take the risk to save them. What are they called? She asked quietly. This species in the Dark Zone? Vexenar checked his ancient records. The precursors gave them a name in the old language. It's translated into common speech. It means those who rise from death, but they call themselves by a simpler name. He paused, as if saying the word might summon them. Humans. The word hung in the air like a curse. No one had heard it before. But somehow it sounded dangerous, even in the peaceful chamber of the Galactic Council. Zixthera made her decision. Her people were facing extinction. The most powerful civilizations in the galaxy couldn't help her. She was down to one option, no matter how dangerous it might be. I want to send them a message, she said. Ambassador Morden warned, breaking a precursor quarantine is forbidden by galactic law. The consequences could be severe, more severe than watching my entire species get harvested by machines. Zixthera asked. I'll take responsibility. If these humans are as dangerous as the records say, maybe that's exactly what we need. Against the protests of half the council, Zixthera authorized the launch of a single message pod toward the Dark Zone. The message was simple, written in basic mathematical concepts that any intelligent species should understand. We are dying. Please help us. As the pod disappeared into the darkness between stars, Zixthera wondered if she had just saved her people or doomed the entire galaxy. In the depths of space, her desperate plea traveled toward a quarantine system where creatures lived that the ancient precursors had feared to contact. She would have her answer soon enough. 6 weeks had passed since the message pod disappeared into the dark zone. Ambassador Zixthera spent every day watching the long-range sensors, hoping for any sign of response. The other council members thought she was wasting her time, even suggested that the humans were probably extinct. Victims of their own violent nature or their hostile world, the war continued to spread. 3 more Villani colonies had fallen to the Krog forces. The Shadow Collective's harvesting machines worked day and night, stripping entire worlds of life. The few survivors who escaped told horrible stories of cities turned into processing plants and forests becoming gray wastelands. Zixthera was in her quarters on Kepler Prime Station, reviewing casualty reports when the alarms began to sound. She rushed to the observation deck, where a crowd of aliens was already gathering. Their various voices created a chaos of sounds as they pointed toward the VIEWPORT. In the distance, space itself seemed to be bending. Reality twisted like water, and then something began to emerge from the darkness. At first, it looked like a single massive shadow moving against the stars. Then more shadows appeared, each one taking shape as it moved closer to the station. Bye. The ancient lights, whispered Counselor Vexinar, who had lived long enough to see many strange things. What are those? The ships that emerged from whatever passage they had used were unlike anything in the galactic databases. They were long and sleek, with curves that reminded viewers of hunting animals. Their hulls seemed to absorb light, making them hard to see clearly, even when they were close. Strange patterns moved across their surfaces like living tattoos. The lead ship was enormous, easily a kilometer long. It moved through space with the grace of a creature born for hunting. Smaller ships surrounded it like a pack following their leader. All of them radiated a sense of barely controlled power. Station Commander Thyax, a nervous hegemony officer with too many eyes, received the first communication. The signal came through on frequencies that shouldn't have been able to penetrate the station's shields. When the message was decoded, it was simple and direct. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth ship Retribution. We received your message. Request permission to dock. The name meant nothing to the aliens, but the voice that spoke, it carried authority that made even the largest council members step back from their viewing screens. It was a deep, controlled voice that suggested its owner was used to being obeyed without question. United Earth ship, Commander Thyax repeated slowly. Earth. That must be their world's name. Grant them docking permission, Zixthera said. Quickly, she had waited too long for this moment to let bureaucracy delay it. But we don't know anything about their customs, their biology, their intentions, Thyax protested. They could be carrying diseases or weapons, or they could be our only hope, Zixthera interrupted. Let them dock. An hour later, the docking bay was filled with curious and nervous aliens. Representatives from every species on the station had come to see the mysterious humans. Security forces stood ready, though no one was sure what they were preparing for. The airlock hissed open, and the first human stepped onto Kepler Prime Station. Captain Jake Morrison was not what anyone had expected. He was tall, but not unnaturally so, with gray hair and a face marked by scars. His eyes moved constantly, taking in everything around him with the focus of a predator evaluating potential threats and prey. When he walked, it was with the confident stride of someone who had never met a situation he couldn't handle. Behind him came Commander Lisa Carter, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a practical style. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing as she scanned the crowd of aliens. She carried herself like a weapon that was currently sheathed, but ready to be drawn at any moment. The aliens stared in fascination and growing unease. Unlike other species they knew, humans had their eyes positioned on the front of their heads. This was the mark of a hunting species, a predator that tracked prey by sight. Their bodies were built for violence, with strong muscles and quick reflexes that were obvious even when they were standing still. Which one of you sent the message? Captain Morrison asked. His voice carried easily across the docking bay. Every alien felt compelled to listen. Zixthera stepped forward, her crystal form catching the light. I did. I am Ambassador Zixthera of the Villani Consortium. We desperately need your help. Morrison studied her for a moment with those predator eyes. We know about your situation. We've been watching. Commander Thyax stepped forward. But your species is quarantined. How could you be watching us? Commander Carter smiled, and the expression was not entirely comforting. Did you really think a force field around one star system could keep us locked up if we didn't want to be locked up? The implications of her words sent a chill through the crowd. If humans had been able to break the precursor quarantine, what else were they capable of? We respected the barrier, Morrison continued. Not because we couldn't leave, but because we chose to. We wanted to develop on our own, without interference from galactic politics. But we've been listening to your communications and monitoring your military movements for decades. Dr. Alex Kane stepped through the airlock behind the others. He was a thin man with intelligent eyes and hands that moved quickly as he spoke. We've been particularly interested in the Shadow Collective's expansion patterns. Their technology is impressive, but their tactics are predictable. Predictable? Vexinar spoke up from the crowd. They've conquered dozens of worlds without suffering a single defeat because they've been fighting civilized opponents, Dr. Kane replied. Species that follow rules of engagement, that try to minimize casualties, that have ethical concerns about certain weapons and tactics. The Shadow Collective has adapted to counter-civilized warfare. Commander Carter pulled out a device that projected a holographic star map. We've been tracking their movements for months. The attack on the Villani colonies isn't random aggression. It's a test. A test of what? Zixthera asked. Everything, Morrison answered. They're testing your military capabilities, your response times, your willingness to work together. They're gathering data on every weapon system, every defensive strategy, every tactical doctrine used by galactic civilizations. The projection changed, showing Shadow Collective movements overlaid with galactic military responses. The pattern was clear to anyone who looked closely. Every battle had been designed to extract maximum information about galactic capabilities. But why? Asked Thyax. If they're already winning, why do they need more information? Commander Sarah. Blake emerged from the airlock, and her presence made several aliens step back involuntarily. She was smaller than the other humans, but she moved with the deadly grace of a natural killer. Her eyes held no warmth, only cold calculation. Because the Villani colonies aren't their real target, Blake said. Neither are any of the other species they've attacked so far. They're just practice runs. She manipulated the holographic display, and a new image appeared. It showed a small blue and green planet orbiting a yellow star. This is Earth, Blake continued, our home world. According to our intelligence, the Shadow Collective has been preparing for an assault on our system for over a year. Everything they've done in this galaxy has been preparation for invading the one world they truly want. But why your world? Zixthera asked. What makes Earth so special? Dr. Kane stepped forward again. Genetic diversity. Earth has more different forms of life than any world the Shadow Collective has encountered. Our planet went through multiple extinction events, and each time life found new ways to survive and evolve. The Shadow Collective wants to harvest that diversity to create the perfect biological weapon. They've been studying galactic species to understand how organic life functions in space, Morrison added. But Earth represents something unique. A world so hostile that it forced evolution to become creative, aggressive, and adaptable. Commander Carter brought up another display. The Shadow Collective's bioprocessing facilities are designed to handle the kind of life forms found on most civilized worlds. Peaceful species that evolved in stable environments. They're not prepared for life forms that evolved in constant warfare with their own planet. The aliens listened with growing understanding and fear. The humans weren't just another military force. They were the products of a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years. And they had not only survived, but become the dominant species. So you came to help us? Zixthera asked hopefully. Morrison's smile was not reassuring. We came to help ourselves. The The Shadow Collective wants Earth, which means we have to destroy them before they get strong enough to take it.
Helping you
Is just part of that process. Your colonies, your people, your entire civilization, Blake added matter-of-factly, are secondary concerns. We're here because this threat will eventually reach our world, and humans have never been good at waiting for danger to come to us. The honesty was brutal, but somehow more comforting than empty promises of heroism would have been. These humans weren't claiming to be saviors or noble defenders of justice. They were predators protecting their territory, and that made them more trustworthy than species that might have hidden motives. Can you defeat the Shadow Collective? Exonar asked quietly. The combined fleet assembled in the outer system of Serafina Prime, the Villani homeworld. What they found there was worse than anyone had imagined. The once beautiful planet, famous throughout the galaxy for its crystal cities and floating gardens, was now a gray wasteland wrapped in dark clouds. Massive Shadow Collective machines hung in orbit like mechanical spiders, each one the size of a small moon. Streams of energy connected them to the planet's surface, where bioharvesting facilities worked day and night. The machines were literally draining the life from the world, turning everything organic into fuel for their war effort. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the Retribution, studying the tactical displays with cold efficiency. Around him, alien officers from a dozen different species watched nervously as he planned their assault. They had never served under a human commander before. Morrison's methods were unlike anything they had learned in their military academies. Status. Report. Morrison ordered. Commander Carter stepped forward, her fingers dancing across a control panel. Enemy forces include 12 harvester platforms, approximately 300 Krog escort vessels, and an estimated 50,000 ground troops occupying the major population centers. What about our forces? Asked Admiral Zethkar, a hegemony officer whose species looked like armored bears with too many arms. 47 ships from 6 different species, Carter replied. Total crew complement of 23,000. Outnumbered roughly 13-1. The alien officers exchanged worried glances. Those odds would have been considered impossible by any civilized military doctrine. Several of them began calculating retreat routes and discussing evacuation procedures. Morrison smiled, and the expression made every alien in the room uncomfortable. Perfect. They won't be expecting us to attack. Captain Admiral Zethkar said carefully, "Perhaps we should reconsider. Those numbers are exactly what we want," Morrison interrupted. "The Shadow Collective has been fighting opponents who think like you do. Opponents who see those odds and decide the battle is already lost. They've designed their entire strategy around the assumption that organic life forms are logical and will retreat when faced with superior numbers." Colonel Ryan Phillips materialized on the bridge's holographic communicator. He was groundside on one of the human ships, preparing his assault troops. His face bore the scars of old battles, and his eyes held the same predatory focus as all the humans. "Ground forces are ready, Captain," Phillips reported. "We've studied the Krog defensive patterns from the last 3 engagements. They're using standard military tactics adapted for urban warfare." "Problems?" Morrison asked. Phillips grinned, and several aliens stepped back from the hologram. "No problems, sir. Just opportunities. The Krog are fighting like civilized soldiers. They're trying to minimize collateral damage, preserve infrastructure, and maintain clear lines of command and control. And that's bad for them because," Commander Carter prompted, though she already knew the answer. "Because we're not civilized," Phillips replied simply. "We're from Earth." Dr. Kane's voice came through the communication system from the science. "Lab Captain, we finished analyzing the Shadow Collective bioharvesting technology. The good news is that we understand how it works. The bad news is that it's more advanced than we initially thought." "Explain," Morrison ordered. "The machines aren't just collecting organic matter randomly," Dr. Kane said. "They're learning from everything they harvest. Every species they process makes them smarter, more adaptable. They've incorporated defensive measures for every known weapon system in the Galactic database." Villani tactical officer, one of the few survivors from their home fleet, spoke up nervously. "Then how can we possibly defeat them? If they've already adapted to counter our weapons, they've adapted to counter your weapons," Commander Sarah Blake said as she entered the bridge. Her voice was calm, but every alien in the room could sense the danger that followed her like a shadow. They've never faced weapons designed by a species that evolved in constant warfare with their own planet. Blake activated a holographic display, showing Earth's surface. The aliens stared in horror at what they saw. Massive storms that could level cities, earthquakes that split continents, volcanoes that could change global climate, oceans filled with creatures that treated humans as prey. "This is our homeworld," Blake continued. "Everything you see there has been trying to kill humans for millions of years. We didn't survive by being reasonable or by following rules of engagement. We survived by being more dangerous than everything else." Major Elena Rodriguez joined the briefing from the flight deck. She was responsible for the human fighter squadrons. And like all human pilots, she flew with a reckless skill that terrified alien observers. "Shadow Collective fighter tactics are based on mathematical precision," Rodriguez reported. "They calculate optimal attack vectors, maintain formation integrity, and follow predictable engagement patterns. Their AI systems can counter any logical flight strategy." "But not illogical ones?" asked Admiral Zethkar. Rodriguez smiled. "Admiral, human pilots don't fly by mathematics. We fly by instinct, aggression, and pure stubbornness. We do things that AI systems categorize as impossible or suicidal. When their computers try to predict our next move, we do something that makes no tactical sense, but works anyway." Morrison nodded approvingly. "That's the key advantage we have. The Shadow Collective has spent thousands of years perfecting counters to logical warfare. They can defeat any enemy that thinks rationally about combat, and we don't think rationally," the Villani officer asked. "Son," Colonel Phillips said from his hologram, "rational thinking is what keeps you alive on civilized worlds. On Earth, rational thinking gets you killed. We learn to survive by being unpredictable, adaptable, and absolutely refusing to accept defeat, even when defeat is the logical outcome." Commander Carter brought up the battle plan. It was unlike anything the alien officers had ever seen. Instead of the careful, methodical approach preferred by galactic militaries, the humans proposed a simultaneous multi-vector assault that seemed designed to create maximum chaos. This plan has a 73% probability of massive friendly fire incidents. Admiral Zethkar calculated quickly. "Only 73%? Morrison asked with mock disappointment. "We'll have to work on that." The alien officers stared at him in shock. He was joking about friendly fire casualties. No civilized commander would ever consider such a thing acceptable. "Captain," the Villani officer said weakly, "surely you don't mean to actually implement a strategy that will result in our own forces shooting each other?" "Of course not," Morrison replied. "You mean to implement a strategy that looks like it will result in friendly fire, but actually won't, because human forces know how to coordinate in chaos. The Shadow Collective will expect us to maintain safe distances and clear firing solutions. When we don't, their targeting systems will have no idea how to respond." Lieutenant Colonel Matt Sullivan's voice joined the conference from his position with the ground assault forces. "Captain, we've identified the primary bioprocessing facility on the surface. It's heavily defended, but the defenses are designed to stop conventional assault tactics." "Define conventional," Morrison said. "Organized advance under covering fire, secure landing zones, established supply lines, methodical reduction of defensive positions." Sullivan rattled off the standard procedure. "And we're not doing that because conventional tactics take time, and time allows the Shadow Collective to adapt," Sullivan replied. "Instead, we're going to drop directly into the middle of their strongest defensive positions and fight our way out in all directions simultaneously." The alien officers looked at each other in disbelief. What the humans were describing wasn't military strategy. It was organized insanity. Commander Blake seemed to read their thoughts. "You're thinking like civilized beings. You see our plan? And calculate the casualties, the risks, the probability of failure. But you're missing the most important factor." "Which is?" Admiral Zethkar asked. "We're from a world where this kind of chaos is normal," Blake replied. "Every human in this fleet grew up in conditions that would kill most galactic species. We learn to function in environments where everything is trying to kill you, where the weather changes without warning, where the ground itself might try to swallow you. Major Rodriguez continued the explanation. When we fight in conditions that terrify our enemies, we're not struggling to adapt like they are. We're finally in our element. The more chaotic and dangerous the situation becomes, the more comfortable we get. Dr. Kane's voice added scientific context. The Shadow Collective's adaptive systems are designed to learn from repeated encounters with the same tactics. But human combat doctrine is based on never using the same tactic twice. We improvise. We adapt. We overcome. Every human saying about warfare comes back to the same concept, Colonel Phillips noted. When the plan fails, make a new plan.
Wow.
When the new plan fails, make it up as you go. When making it up as you go fails, get angry and do something so crazy that even your own side doesn't know what you're doing. Captain Morrison looked around the bridge at the alien officers. He could see the fear in their various eyes, but he could also see something else. Hope. The battle for Serafina Prime began exactly as Captain Morrison had promised. Nothing went according to plan, and that was exactly what the humans wanted. The Shadow Collective's massive harvester ships opened fire with energy weapons that could vaporize entire city blocks. Their targeting computers calculated perfect firing solutions based on the predicted movements of the incoming fleet. But the human ships didn't move where they were supposed to move. Instead of maintaining safe distances and following logical attack patterns, the human vessels dove straight through the enemy formation like predators attacking a herd. They twisted and turned in patterns that seemed random but were actually guided by combat instincts developed over millions of years of surviving on a world that constantly tried to kill them. Major Rodriguez led her fighter squadron through a defensive grid that should have been impossible to penetrate. The Shadow Collective's automated turrets fired streams of energy that could track and destroy any known fighter craft. But human pilots didn't fly like machines. They flew like living creatures avoiding natural predators. Red 3, you've got 2 bandits on your tail, Rodriguez called over the communication system. Copy that, Red Leader, came the reply from Lieutenant Danny White. Watch this. White pulled his fighter into a maneuver that made the alien observers gasp in horror. Instead of trying to outrun the pursuing enemy ships, he flew directly toward a massive piece of space debris. The last possible second, he rolled his craft sideways and slipped through a gap that was barely wider than his ship's wingspan. The 2 Shadow Collective fighters, guided by logical programming, attempted to follow the same path. Their computers calculated that the gap was too narrow and automatically pulled up to avoid collision. In that moment of hesitation, White spun his fighter around and destroyed both pursuers with precise weapons fire. How did he know that gap was wide enough? Asked a Villani pilot who was monitoring the battle. He didn't, Rodriguez replied calmly. He guessed. And if he guessed wrong, he would have died. But humans are very good at guessing correctly when our lives depend on it. The real shock came when Commander Torres led his reconnaissance teams toward the Shadow Collective's main command ship. The massive vessel was surrounded by defensive fields that generated radiation levels lethal to most known life forms. The alien crews had to retreat. When their shielding couldn't protect them from the deadly energy, the humans flew straight through it. Commander Torres called Admiral Zethkar from his command ship. Sensors show radiation levels around that vessel that would kill my crew in minutes. How are you still alive? Torres' voice came back steady and unworried. Admiral, the radiation around this ship is about half as strong as a typical summer day on Earth. Our people are adapted to live on a world that's naturally radioactive. This is actually pretty comfortable. Dr. Kane's voice joined the conversation from his mobile laboratory. Admiral, you have to understand that Earth's environment is so hostile that humans developed natural resistance to things that would kill. Other species, radiation, toxic gases, extreme pressure changes, temperature variations that would flash freeze most organic matter. Humans don't just survive these conditions. They barely notice them. The Shadow Collective's adaptive systems began to malfunction as they tried to counter human tactics. Their computers were designed to learn from enemy behavior and develop countermeasures. But But human behavior didn't follow patterns that could be learned. When the machines expected the humans to retreat from overwhelming firepower, the human ships moved closer to their enemies. When logic dictated that human forces should consolidate for mutual support, they scattered in all directions and attacked from unexpected angles. When mathematical probability suggested that human pilots would avoid dangerous maneuvers, they performed stunts that defied physics and common sense. On the planet's surface, Colonel Phillips and Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan led their ground forces through conditions that forced the alien support troops to remain in their ships. The bioharvesting facilities had turned the atmosphere toxic and filled the air with mechanical spores designed to break down organic matter. Atmospheric analysis shows toxin levels that would dissolve hegemony battle armor in under an hour, reported a technical officer from orbit. Copy that? Phillips replied. We'll try to wrap this up quickly then. The human ground forces moved through the poisoned air wearing nothing more than basic filtration masks. What should have been a deadly environment was merely an annoyance to creatures who had evolved breathing the volcanic gases and industrial pollution of Earth. Sullivan's assault teams reached the primary bioprocessing facility after fighting through defensive positions that had been designed to stop conventional military forces. The Shadow Collective had placed their strongholds in locations that were tactically perfect: high ground with clear fields of fire, natural obstacles that would channel attackers into kill zones, and environmental hazards that would weaken any assault force. But humans had spent their entire evolutionary history learning to turn environmental hazards into advantages. Sergeant Foster Sullivan called to one of his squad leaders, "What's the status on that defensive position?" Sergeant First Class Danny Foster was crouched behind cover that was dissolving from acid rain while energy bolts sizzled through the air around him. Any civilized soldier would have been calling for artillery support or requesting evacuation. Foster was studying the enemy fortification like a puzzle he was looking forward to solving. "Sir, they've got the high ground, overlapping fields of fire, and they're using the acid pools as natural barriers to channel our approach," Foster reported. "It's a textbook defensive position." And Foster grinned, and even through the communication system, Sullivan could hear the predatory satisfaction in his voice. "And it's designed to stop people who think like civilized soldiers." "But we're not civilized, are we, sir?" "No, Sergeant, we're not." "What's your plan?" "Well, sir, those acid pools that are supposed to stop us are flowing downhill toward the enemy position, and that high ground they're so proud of, it's going to be underwater in about 10 minutes when I blow the retention dam upstream." Sullivan looked at his tactical display and saw what Foster had noticed. The Shadow Collective had built their fortress in what they thought was the perfect defensive location. But they had failed to consider that humans were the only known species that regularly used their planet's own hostile environment as a weapon. Execute. "Your plan, Sergeant?" Within minutes, Foster and his team had turned the Shadow Collective's perfect defensive position into a trap. The acid that was supposed to keep humans away instead washed through the enemy fortifications. The high ground that provided excellent firing positions became a death trap when the artificial lake above it was released. The Shadow Collective forces found themselves fighting not just human soldiers, but the planet itself, weaponized by creatures who had spent millions of years learning how to make hostile environments work for them instead of against them. Commander Blake coordinated the overall ground assault from her mobile, it's a command post, which was actually advancing ahead of the front lines. Most species kept their command centers well behind their fighting forces, protected by layers of security in defensive positions. Blake led from the front because that's where she could best observe and adapt to changing conditions. "Status report from all units," she called. "3rd Battalion has secured the eastern bioprocessor," came one report. "Enemy forces retreated. When we collapsed their defensive tunnel system using standard Earth mining techniques, 5th Battalion has eliminated the western command posts," came another. Turns out their fortification wasn't designed to withstand someone climbing the outside wall. Apparently, most galactic species don't have the grip strength to hang from vertical surfaces while under fire. 7th Battalion has captured the central power facility, reported a 3rd unit. The facility was built inside a volcanic vent for natural heat disposal. The defending forces evacuated when the temperature reached levels they considered lethal. "We're still wearing our standard gear." Blake nodded with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly as human military doctrine demanded. Nothing was going according to plan, and they were winning anyway. The breakthrough came when Dr. Kane and his scientific team discovered the critical flaw in the Shadow Collective's adaptive systems. Working from samples gathered during the battle, they found that the machines could only adapt to threats they could understand and categorize. Captain Morrison, Dr. Kane reported from his laboratory, "I've figured out why the Shadow Collective is having trouble countering our tactics. Their learning algorithms are based on the assumption that all intelligent behavior follows logical patterns. They can adapt to any strategy that makes sense." "But our strategies don't make sense," Morrison replied, understanding immediately. "Exactly. We do things that their systems classify as impossible or suicidal. We succeed anyway. Their computers don't know how to process that information. They keep trying to find the logic behind our actions, but there isn't any logic. There's just instinct, aggression, and the kind of stubborn refusal to give up that only comes from evolving on a world that never stops trying to kill you." The final battle took place at the Shadow Collective's primary facility, a massive construct built around a captured star. The structure was so large that it had its own gravity, with layers of factories, weapons, platforms, and processing centers. Wrapped around the burning stellar core like the shell of some impossible egg, Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the Retribution, looking at the tactical display with the same calm expression he had worn throughout the entire campaign. Around him, officers from a dozen different species prepared for what everyone knew would be their final mission. The combined fleet had grown during their victories, as liberated worlds sent whatever ships they could spare to join the fight. "Final headcount," Morrison ordered. Commander Carter consulted her displays. 237 ships from 18 different species. Total crew complement of 94,000. They're still outnumbered, but not as badly as before. Enemy forces. The facility itself is approximately 800 kilometers in diameter. Sensors detect over 5,000 automated defense platforms, 3 million combat drones, and the central processing core that controls the entire Shadow Collective network. Admiral Zethkar, who had become Morrison's unofficial second-on-command among the alien forces, studied the readings with his multiple eyes. "Captain, even with our recent victories, this target is beyond our capabilities. The firepower concentrated around that facility could destroy entire star systems." Morrison smiled, and by now the alien officers had learned that human smiles in combat situations were not expressions of happiness. "Admiral, you're still thinking like a civilized being. You see those defenses and calculate the odds of a conventional assault, and you're not planning a conventional assault," Admiral Zethkar said, understanding beginning to dawn in his voice. "We're not planning an assault at all," Commander Blake said as she joined the briefing. "We're planning something that the Shadow Collective will never expect because no sane species would ever attempt it." Dr. Kane appeared on the communication system from his laboratory. "Captain, we've completed our analysis of the facility's structure. The central core is positioned inside the star's corona, using the stellar radiation as both a power source and a defensive barrier." "Radiation levels?" Morrison asked. "Lethal to all known organic life within 30 seconds of exposure. No species in the Galactic database has ever developed natural resistance to stellar-level radiation. No species except one," Morrison replied. The alien officers looked at each other with growing understanding and horror. The humans weren't just planning to attack the facility, they were planning to fly directly into a star to do it. "Captain," Admiral Zethkar said carefully, "surely you don't mean to take your ships into the corona of an active star?" "Not all of them," Morrison replied. "Just the ones crewed entirely by humans. The rest of you will handle the outer defenses and keep the escape route clear." Colonel Phillips joined the conference from his position with the assault forces. "Ground teams are ready, Captain. We've studied the facility's internal structure, and we've identified the optimal insertion points. How exactly do you plan to insert ground forces into a facility that's inside a star?" asked a Villani officer. Phillips grinned. "Very carefully and very quickly. The facility has docking ports for maintenance craft, They're not heavily defended because the designers assumed that nothing could survive long enough in the stellar environment to use them. They assumed correctly for any civilized species, Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan added. But humans have been working in high radiation environments since we discovered nuclear power. This is just a matter of scale. Commander Torres materialized in the holographic display from his stealth ship. Reconnaissance teams have mapped the facility's internal layout. The central processing core is located in the deepest section, surrounded by backup systems and automated defenses. Defenses designed to stop what kind of threats? Morrison asked. Mechanical infiltration systems, energy-based attacks, and coordinated assault by organized military forces, Torres replied. They're not designed to stop small teams of organic beings who can survive in environments that should kill them. Doctor? Kane brought up a detailed schematic of the facility's core. The processing center is where the Shadow Collective stores all the data it's collected from harvested worlds. Every species they've consumed, every tactical doctrine they've learned, every adaptation they've made. Destroying that core won't just stop their current operations. It will erase everything they've learned and force them to start over. There's anything left of them to start over with, Blake added coldly. The assault began with the kind of precision that only comes from desperate necessity. The human ships, their hulls, modified with additional radiation shielding. Dove directly toward the captured star, while the alien vessels engaged the outer defensive platforms. Major Rodriguez led her fighter squadrons through the corona itself, her pilots navigating by instruments that were failing from radiation damage while flying through plasma storms that could have powered entire cities. The Shadow Collective's defensive systems, never designed to function inside a star, began to malfunction almost immediately. Red Leader to all fighters, Rodriguez called over the communication system, her voice steady despite the fact that her cockpit was glowing from residual radiation. Remember, we only get one pass at this. Make it count. The human fighters moved through the stellar environment, like they were flying through a thunderstorm back on Earth. They had trained for this kind of mission because humans were the only species crazy enough to practice combat maneuvers inside their own star's outer atmosphere. On the facility's outer hull, Sullivan's assault teams used cutting tools to breach the maintenance ports while standing on surfaces hot enough to melt most known metals. They wore suits designed for the most extreme environments Earth could produce, modified with additional cooling systems and radiation protection. Breaching Team Alpha is inside, Sullivan reported. Internal temperature is approximately 800 degrees Celsius. Radiation levels are roughly equivalent to standing inside an active nuclear reactor. Copy that, Morrison replied from the Retribution's bridge. Proceed with the mission. With pleasure, sir. It's actually cooler in here than it was on the hull. The assault teams moved through the facility's corridors with the efficiency of apex predators in their natural environment. The Shadow Collective's internal defenses had been designed to stop civilized military forces, not small teams of humans who treated lethal radiation as a minor inconvenience. Sergeant Foster led his squad through sections of the facility where the temperature would have vaporized most organic matter. They used the extreme conditions to their advantage, moving through areas that the facility's automated systems assumed were impassable. Sergeant Foster to Colonel Sullivan came his report. We've reached the central processing core. The area is heavily defended, but the defenses are positioned to stop large assault forces, not individual infiltrators. What's your plan, Sergeant? Well, sir, the core is surrounded by coolant systems designed to keep the processors from overheating. But those systems weren't designed to handle additional heat sources, such as a few thermite charges. Placed in exactly the right locations, the processing core will try to compensate for the additional heat by drawing more power from the star.
Oh.
But there's an upper limit to how much stellar energy these systems can handle before they overload. Sullivan understood immediately. Foster wasn't just planning to destroy the core, he was planning to turn the facility's own power source against it. Execute your plan, Sergeant. Dr. Kane monitored the facility's energy readings from his position. Aboard the Retribution, Captain, internal power levels are fluctuating wildly. The core systems are trying to compensate for multiple heat sources, but they're drawing more energy than the containment systems can handle. How long until complete? System failure? Morrison asked. At current rate of increase, approximately 12 minutes. Morrison activated the fleet communication system. All units, this is Captain Morrison. We have 12 minutes to complete this mission and get clear of the blast radius. Anyone who wants to survive this needs to finish their objectives and head for the extraction point now. The final moments of the battle were a testament to human refusal to accept defeat. As the facility's systems began to fail catastrophically, the assault teams completed their mission. Objectives while working in conditions that should have been impossible to survive. Foster and his squad reached the central core just as the containment systems began to overload. The room was filled with energy discharges that would have killed any other known species instantly. The humans worked calmly and efficiently, placing their remaining charges while the very air around them glowed with deadly radiation. Charges set, Foster reported. Core destruction in 3 minutes. All teams extract immediately, Sullivan ordered. But Foster's team was too far from the extraction point. They had known from the beginning that this was a one-way mission. Negative, Colonel, Foster replied. We're not going to make it out in time, but that's okay. This is what we came here to do. His voice remained steady as the facility began to tear itself apart around him. Tell them back home that we finished the job.